There has been a sea change in Marvel Snap between the compensation, the very generous Sanctum Showdown. A lot of the hot takes this week revolve around Second Dinner being very generous, which I've talked about ad nauseum, but I think it's very odd to watch the community sort of realize what is actually going on with this game right now. I thought there may have been a vibe shift, and I think a lot of these hot takes confirm it. However, we've still got some real spice. Let's get into it. Mr. Negative is worse than Hela, and a lot of the reasons people say Hela feels bad to play against can also be applied to him. Okay, so basically, I think that this person is looking at it on a game-to-game basis, which is very different from looking at it the way I look at it. On a game-to-game basis, yeah, you have the same sort of feeling of hopelessness when your opponent does the thing, and you're playing some deck that just doesn't really have the ability to measure up. There are two sort of appreciable differences. One is that Hela does what it does on a game-to-game basis with far more consistency, thanks to cards like Adam Warlock, Thaddeus Ross, Jubilee, and Blink, depending on which suite of card drawers you run, and thanks to the fact that you only really need to have Hela by turn 6 and kind of the rest of the deck takes care of itself. So there's a difference of consistency here. And then that difference of consistency between the two also sort of informs your ability to play other decks. So when you are in a Mr. Negative matchup, you know what their snaps mean. They mean they have the stuff. You know what their non-snaps mean. It means they're probably limping in with a gore game plan. It's pretty straightforward. If the metagame becomes widely populated by Mr. Negative, you can take whatever deck you're playing and put a Mobius M Mobius in there, and then you'll suddenly have the ability to snap them back in the same way they snap you. This is valuable. There's just simply not a card that does that for Hela. People talk about Fenris Wolf. It does not carry enough weight. When Hela is discarding multiple cards, you cannot simply put Fenris Wolf in any deck. Fenris Wolf also wants you to be playing certain things alongside it. It is not effective enough in the matchup that you're targeting to justify being run as a solo-only card in much the same way as, or in the opposite way as Mobius is against Mr. Negative, where it basically just instantly wins the game. And so you have this kind of dynamic that affects things at the metagame level. I see a lot of people saying like, oh, there are decks that beat Hela, and that's not the problem. Like, yeah, if you want to beat Hela, you can play Clog. That's never been the issue. The issue is that in order to beat Hela, you have to fully change decks. There's no, like, card you can introduce in the deck you invested in, right? And that's especially problematic in Marvel Snap, where people constantly talk about how difficult it can be to actually get all the cards, to have the ability to change decks to something that beats Hela. So when people talk about like how Hela and Mr. Negative being the same, I can't really see that as anything but not necessarily like misguided, but it's just sort of not looking at it by the dynamics that actually matter. The dynamic I'm talking about with Hela is not about how she feels game to game. It's about, oh, if I play deck X, I cannot ever beat Hela, and there is no solution to that. What Hela does is create yes or no metagames, where the answer is, can you go taller than her? Or the question is, can you go taller than her? And the answer has to be yes, because if the answer is no, you're losing, unless you are specifically built to counter her as a full Clog deck. So what she's telling you to do effectively is don't play the deck you want to play, because it'll lose to her. And there is no solution to that, and that is ultimately the problem that she causes. She is much more consistent with her output than Mr. Negative. She has no actual legitimate, I can put a card in my mid-range deck to actually have a reasonable matchup against this deck kind of plans or anything like that. And so she ends up being this thing that hangs over the metagame and sort of linearly pushes it in a certain direction, which is to say, things that can beat her. You have to play things that can beat her, and then people try to play the things that beat those things, and then the things that beat those things lose to Hela, and like that's typically how a metagame goes, but there's so many fewer options when she is the starting point for these metagames, because anything that you play has to be able to beat her due to her consistency and the lack of tech cards, meaning that you have to, like, instead of teching your deck for a matchup, play a completely different deck, which is not possible for many people. Character Mastery has been a fantastic addition so far. It cleverly took a page out of the Everyone Gets a Trophy book by showing that mastery really has nothing to do with your gameplay or character skills. Splitting cards is much more exciting now with a massively wide range of banana-themed results. Having 99 in your collection tab makes you feel like a kid at Christmas, seeing every present under the tree has your name on it. It's the gift that just keeps on giving 100 times over. I wanted to put this on here because I think it's actually like some pretty solid bait. Like it's good, right? It looks like a normal comment and then you read it and you're like, oh, okay, haha, I get it now. I just really wanted to say, like this is like a really like a lot of the times I get bait that is like people saying like obviously good card is bad. And it's like, okay, whatever. This I think is nice. If he took the time to put the bait into words and to like say the opposite of what he meant. And I really appreciate that. As far as character mastery goes, I honestly have come around on it in the sense of like, I kind of like the new splits a lot more than other people seem to. I do think there are some misses where it's like there's not really anything that everyone can agree is on the same level as Golden Ink. And so that makes it a little bit harder for me to actually care, where it's like I already had so many Golden Ink splits and none of my new splits are actually better than that. But I do like that there's just more cool stuff to look at in the game now. Sanctum should ask you to contest 2 locations instead of 1. Okay, hear me out, right? What if instead of Sanctum Showdown, it asked you to contest 3 locations and you had to win 2 out of the 3? And we like, instead of like putting a points limit on it, we put like a time limit on it. So like you had like 6 turns within which to like win 2 out of 3 locations. And whoever did that would win the game. That seems like a really cool game mode to me. And I think they should try it. As far as Sanctum Showdown having the second, like the ability to have a second Sanctum in Sanctum Showdown, I think what you'd want to do if you were to do that would, instead of being like, oh, there are 2 Sanctums of equal points, you'd want to do like one is worth like 7, one is worth like 4, and one is worth like 1. You'd still want to have like some sort of decent level of asymmetry there, where there's like the game is telling you like to focus on this, because I think a lot of what made Sanctum cool was the dynamics of like, I'm hyper investing over here, and then next turn my investment will not be particularly useful to me because it was 4 points last turn, but now it's 1 point, right? I think that dynamic is actually pretty cool in Sanctum, and I think the more you like make it's like, oh, well, it's just sort of like the more Sanctums there are, the less interesting stuff happens. I think you'd still want to have like a big important investment really matter on the high points locations. The Spotlight system is so bad that getting free random cards is actually bad because it devalues Spotlight weeks where you could have pulled 2 or 3 cards. I realize this is in tarot, so it's like, it's hard for me to tell exactly like the level of seriousness here. That's just like kind of how it goes. But I do think that this is highlighting something that I think is actually important for people to like explicitly understand about the Spotlight system, which is it is worse for people who have more cards, which is objectively a thing I think people have said that they want. The Spotlight system is explicitly a system that is better the fewer cards you have, because you are getting more cards out of Spotlights instead of variants and crap, right? The more cards you have, the less you actually have. So what this comment is actually saying is correctly identifying the dynamic that's going on, and then saying it's bad to get cards because it makes Spotlights worse and Spotlights are bad because of that. It's the other way around. Like, if you were designing a system that was explicitly built to favor players with lower collections, I think probably more than half of the community would be in favor of that. If you came out and you said, I want people with lower collections to have more stuff, I want people with higher collections, I want the whales to be subsidizing this, I think a lot of people would be like, that's a great idea. What they don't realize is that is literally what we have. That is the actual system we have right now. It is a system that scales inversely to how many cards you already have. Someone like me, I'm only ever getting 1 card out of a round of Spotlight opening. Ever, at most. Someone else might get 3 to 4 cards if they don't have any. That is a feature, not a bug. It is not like an, oh, Spotlights suck because of this. It's probably the one redeeming feature of Spotlight caches, in as much as there are any, where it's like, that dynamic is actually probably a thing that is very good for people that they simply are not appreciating. This is a great thing for anyone who is starting the game. for anyone who is working their way up the collection track. Having the ability to do this is really, 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 really good. Getting those 3 to 4 cards the first time you open Spotlight caches, that's a really, really, really good thing. The better Spotlight caches get, the more that's going to be a good thing. It is the one thing about this system that I think is unimpeachably good, and I don't like seeing people actually get mad at it as if it's a flaw. That is not a flaw. They kind of undersold the value Sanctum would provide, but that was probably better than risking overselling it. So, yes, they definitely undersold it. But also, I kind of think that they, I don't know the right way to say this. I don't think they intended Twitch drops to work the way they did. I just don't. Like, when you look at their statements that they made previously in the context of like, oh, okay, we think you'll be able to get like 2+ cards, right? 2.5, 3, whatever. And then you look at what actually happened with the Twitch drops, which is everyone getting that all in one day. Like, I'm seeing that, like, if you grinded Sanctum, you probably ended up with, like, let's say about 6 cards. And that is remarkably, remarkably generous and not something I would expect to be in line with their early projections. So there are 2 real options here. One is that they revised their projections upward late in the process. They looked at the system and they were like, let's get a little bit more generous. And then they did that and they made it a little more generous. 2 is that the Twitch drops was just like a thing they didn't account for, because in the, like, there's no way for you to acquire charms that don't count for your rank. Like, or maybe there's just like a button they pressed. They just weren't prepared for that injection of charms for the sorcerer rank. Maybe sorcerer rank was added late. I don't know. But ultimately, my best guess is that both of those things happened. That, like, they were like, we should get a little more generous, and then also the Twitch drops thing was a mistake. And I want to be super clear about that. I would not expect the next iteration of Sanctum Showdown to have Twitch drops that count for your sorcerer rank. I think it would be fine for them to have Twitch drops. I do not think they should. I do not think they would count for sorcerer rank. And so I do think that right now, Second Dinner is sort of benefiting from the good PR of a mistake, where it's like, I don't think they intended to make that happen. I think it was probably an accident that they didn't really foresee. And right now, people are giving them a lot of credit as being very generous. And I expect those people to be fairly upset when the next time this happens comes around, right? Like, I do not think that the Twitch drops counting for sorcerer rank was intentional. I do not expect that to happen again. And I do think that the fact that people were still talking about this being a grind was in large part due to the fact that the sort of reward system or the intended way in which you were to interact with this was broken by that, where it's like, yeah, you're calling it a grind because you're grinding for like an avatar now instead of for like new cards. I don't know exactly. I have no sources on this. Like, I want to be super clear. This isn't like, ooh, I'm alluding to a thing I know. I don't know any of this stuff. But I strongly suspect that the next time Sanctum comes around, it's not going to have a free, effectively 3 cards on day 1. And the fact that this mode had 3 free cards on day 1, and people were still calling it a grind, is something that is sticking in the back of my mind, and I'm noticing it, and I'm not sure what the implications of it are yet. I don't think the implications of it are good, but I do, like, it's just sitting right there, and I'm like, huh, that's a little bit weird, isn't it? People are so used to complaining about new game modes that nobody is talking about the insane value we just got by playing Sanctum for 2 weeks, multiple free cards, and a lot of other good stuff. Yeah, I think that the value you guys got is inflated by about, if I had to ballpark it, I'd ballpark it at like 2,000 charms. I think people in the future should probably expect less from Sanctum. But honestly, I do feel like, despite the fact that I think that the Twitch drops thing was an actual accident, I do think that even with just Twitch drops, not them counting for sorcerer rank, and the introduction of sorcerer rank period, the game mode still was more generous than anything I'd expected. I think even the baseline of this game mode without the Twitch drops day 1 stuff is still more generous than any previous game mode. I just worry that the community is too conditioned at this point, because we've had basically a couple of acts of God that have sort of given the impression of Second Dinner's generosity being vastly different now than it was previously. And I do think it is notably different, but I don't necessarily think it's different to the degree that everyone is sort of talking about right now, which is to say we had the act of God of the game getting banned in America because of the TikTok politics shuffle thing that was happening, right? And then we had the act of God of, I guess, what I'm guessing is like just they didn't check a number, like a little box that said, these don't count for sorcerer rank or whatever. I'm not a programmer. I don't know. And they gave us a basically effectively 2,000 extra charms on the Twitch drops. And I think that that is sort of coloring it, because I don't think necessarily that that was the intended experience of Sanctum Showdown. I think they intended for you to have a reason to play the whole time. And I'm not sure, like, a lot of what I'm seeing is people kind of didn't play the whole time. Like, there were some people playing Sanctum for a while, but like a lot of what I'm seeing is people tapering off in week 2. And that wouldn't happen if they hadn't already gotten everything they wanted out of the game mode. And I think that that is sort of like, if you're a game developer, you look at that and you're like, yeah, we were too generous this time. The Twitch drops was a mistake, right? But I don't think the mistake was giving the Twitch drops. I think the mistake was having them count. Season passes should not include a card in them. They're considered great value because you get a great card along with, a usually absolutely busted card along with the cosmetics or gold, but having to pay $10 every single month because it's the only way to get the new card just feels bad. This one is so weird to me because there's this dynamic that I think of where it's like, I come from another card game, right? I played Magic before this. I played Hearthstone before this. I played Runeterra before this. I've played all these games. And so for me, when I think of playing a card game, I think of playing it on a budget, right? That's like a big thing for me. I was a big fan of like Saffron Olive budget Magic columns. I was a big fan of like when the Wizards of the Coast website used to run budget Magic stuff. I think Brian Kibler made budget decks for Hearthstone back in the day. I'm very old. And so the thing that I really want to get at here is, if you told me that it was just $10 a month to have a competitive deck in a game, I would probably think that's good value. But what I'm getting from Marvel Snap is there are a bunch of people that don't come from card games that play this game. And since if you don't come from card games, the dynamic is more free to play or pay to win. And so any amount of actually paying is bad. And the one thing that you can only get if you pay during the month of release is the Season Pass card, because technically, Spotlight caches and tokens and all of that, you can acquire everything else free to play, technically, even if it's functionally a lot more expensive. And so you have this weird split between people who have played card games and people who haven't played card games. The idea that they should specifically cater to either of those groups is, I think, a mistake. Where it's like, what this person is effectively saying is there should be no ability to convert money into a card that cannot also be acquired via like the other currencies. And I think that's probably a mistake, because what it's doing is it's taking the best value for your money in the game and it's throwing it out the window. And I think the idea that season passes are good dependent on the card being busted is also way off base. I saw a tweet yesterday that was talking about how awesome a bundle someone had put on Twitter was. And the bundle was literally one of the bundles that they released, which contained all the cosmetics from the Thor season pass in the beta. Just the cosmetics. And this person was like, oh my God, this bundle is so good. And it's like, that is the season pass without the card, and without the gold, and without the credits. The season pass is the single best way to spend money in the entire game, and it is that independent of if the card is good. It literally does not matter if the card is good. If you are going to spend money in this game, the season pass is the way to do it. It's literally that simple. The value on it is too good. I would not want to suggest anything that could jeopardize that. Arishem should trigger before the start of game so all the generated cards can get their expected effects. I realize what you're talking about, like, you want your Hulkling to, like, counter whatever, right? There's not actually a timing before the start of the game. They can't make something trigger before the start of the game because it's an ability in the game. You can't have an ability in the game happen before the game starts. That's what start means. Glenn mentioned skills as their own card coming in the future, not just tied to something like Agamotto shuffling them in. Skills will have more design space and be more exciting than activate cards. I think that that's undeniably true, if only because, at least the more design space part. I can't really speak to excitement, that's pretty subjective. But design space, right, like, with an activate, it is impossible to put on a 6-cost card, right? You can't really make a 6-cost activate. It's very hard to make a 5-cost activate. And so, just fundamentally, there's more design space in a skill, because you could make a 6-cost skill. It would just, like, have Hela text or whatever, right? Something equivalent to that, right? Like, you could do that. But it would just have to be, like, something, like, really, really big. But that is a thing you can do, whereas a 6-cost activate is a thing you can't do. And so you have a fundamental ability to engage in an energy cost that the activate mechanic can't really get to. So I don't actually think it's arguable that there's more design space for skills than there is for activates. I think it's just, like, fundamentally true. But I am really interested to know, like, what are people feeling about if they ever actually do this? Because right now you're getting the skills for free. They're attached to a 5/10. They all do good stuff. If you had to, like, put one of those in your deck and it wasn't a card, because, like, I think the Agamotto skills are all stronger than an actual skill you'd release, in much the same way that they can't just print a card that's as good as a Thanos stone, right? They can't just, like, be like, oh yeah, I mean, I'm going to print a 1-drop that says draw a card on it. They can't do that. They have to put other restrictions on it, right? The best we have, the closest to that, is, like, King Atri, who has a lot of restrictions on it. And so they can't just, like, those skills are probably stronger than what I would expect a normal skill to be. Will people be excited for skills that are just, like, pretty good? Like, is that a thing? Like, instead of Winds of Watum, what if it was just, like, 2 energy, your opponent's thing gets -3 here? Are you gonna put that in your deck? I don't know. Like, I actually don't know. Maybe there's some real upside to, like, using it in a sense that, like, oh, I'm getting effectively a 2/3, but it doesn't take up a board slot. That's cool, right? Like, there's some upside there. But, like, are people interested in that? Will people understand that? Is that a thing that people will be able to grasp the power of? Will people be excited for that? Would you pay 3,000 tokens for that? Would you pay 6,000 tokens for that? I actually think on the excitement axis, they're, like, a little bit of a risk, honestly, because the Agamotto spells are obviously very exciting because they are being added to your deck. Like, there's an inherent inconsistency. So when that inconsistency is removed, I would expect the power level to be lower. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching that video. I have been KMBest. Thanks for coming on this journey with me, and I will see you in the next one. As always, you have been phenomenal.